Good morning, Senator Lang, Representative Cornfield, and members of the Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs. My name is Bill Stockmeyer.
Copies.
Thank you. Sorry, I retained on my way. Thank you so much. My name is Bill Stockmeyer. I'm a lawyer at Drummond Woodsum. I represent SAD 44. Most of my practice is in the area of public finance, and particularly with regard to schools. And I was intimately involved in consolidation efforts, as well as now the withdrawal of a number of towns from school districts across the state. I was asked to testify in support of LD 1080 with the objective of explaining just why it is that the education impact of withdrawal is so much different in SAD 44 than in other school district withdrawals across the state. And this impact on education boils down to a fundamental difference in SAD 44's cost-sharing formula. The agreement over the cost-sharing formula occurred when the towns first joined together back in, I believe, the 1960s, and they all voted to have a cost-sharing formula based on valuation. And since 2005, the legislature has recognized the fundamental difference between SAD 40 and also SAD 6 and elsewhere in the state. As you know, the essential core costs to educate children are subsidized by state funding through the Essential Programs and Services funding model. Additional costs are funded without state support. All school districts have a local cost-sharing formula. The local cost-sharing formula is almost always valuation-based or mostly valuation-based. The local cost-sharing formula was approved by the member towns when they formed the district or later by a consensual amendment process. However, when the legislature enacted the EPS funding model, it made a change to how the essential core EPS costs were funded. From that point forward, in almost all school districts, the state funded costs were first divided up among the towns based on student counts, rather than the district's own valuation formulas that they had approved. So by that legislation, the local cost-sharing formulas of school districts generally are no longer applied to EPS costs, but only to additional local costs. So today, when a town withdraws from most school districts, the school district experiences a loss in student count and a proportional loss in support for the core EPS funding costs. Okay, the loss in property valuation due to the withdrawing towns may not even be great, but even if it is, it's proportional to the loss of the number of students, except for the valuation hit on the additional local funds. In other words, the withdrawing towns' share of state and local funding for EPS is proportional, and that mitigates the impact. In SAD 44, it's far different. When the legislature enacted the EPS law, it recognized that this policy change to the funding system based on valuations to one based first on student counts, as generally enacted throughout the state, would cause a dramatic shift in local taxes that would be unsustainable by Bethel, Greenwood, Woodstock. And for that reason, the legislature made an exception to keep the valuation-based cost-sharing formula intact in SAD 44 for the essential core EPS costs, also in SAD 6. What this means today is that withdrawal by Newry hits those core costs in a way that is far disproportionate to the number of their students. This creates a tax impact based on valuation, a much greater impact. So Newry's withdrawal would remove 37% of the district's property valuation and would remove that valuation not just from the additional local funds, but from the foundational educational costs that support education as well. I'd like to just add that the context of this discussion and debate is not a situation where there's a true withdrawal where the parties go their separate ways. In every proposal, both parties have agreed and understood that the Newry students need to be educated in SAD 44. So this isn't really a true separation, but rather a restructuring. And so for these reasons, we ask that you support LD 1080 to effectively keep in place the current existing legislative policy to prevent these cost impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stockmeyer. Any questions, Senator Blunt?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. In your testimony, you mentioned that the legislature made an exception to keep the valuation-based cost funding formula. Is there a, how does the legislature do that and when?
I believe the year was 2005, but when it went to the EPS system of funding education, It changed from a system where each unit's agreed cost sharing formula would apply to all the local costs, to a system where it would divide up the EPS cost based on student count in the first instance, and then examine whether each town needed subsidy on a town-by-town basis. So in most districts throughout the state, when a town leaves, a certain percentage of the students leave, and a proportional share of the funding support leaves, and it's proportionate. Because of the impact,
Yeah, I
they
understand.
made the exception.
For the work session, can you provide for us whatever legislation that was?
I'll do my best.
We could, somehow we could have a request of our analyst to get the legislative
great.
history of it from the law library.
That'd be great. And Tanya, have any
Sure.
questions?
Yeah, I believe, I have some comments on the next piece, and I think I have the cite to the legislation in those as well.
I'm not sure you're the person that. I'm going to ask it anyways, and at least our analysts will be listening as well as others in the room.
If I don't know the answer, I'll say so.
So what I'm curious about is the number of year-round households in Newry. Their contribution of property taxes towards, excuse me, towards the cost of education, SAB 44, and then the total property contribution to the SAB 44. So what I'm trying to get at is, for the year-round residents, what is their percentage contribution to the total cost?
Speaking from memory, under 10%. I have the tax booklets. I can give 2 copies to the committee, and they can look at them.
Ms. Stockmeyer, we can do that after your testimony. I'm sorry? I said we can do that after your testimony.
Okay, I'll hold them until then.
Sure. Representative Sampson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kind of along the lines of Senator Millet's question, I wanted to add to that. So this seems to me that there's a loophole in the law that the Newry would like to withdraw, but they want to return their students' tuition to SAB 44. My question is, in addition to what the Newry students are paying currently, what would they be paying if they tuitioned?
If they tuitioned, the maximum statutory tuition, which cannot be exceeded unless the voters of Newry approved, is something like 10,000?
10,000 secondary, 8,000 elementary.
Just from the audience that stayed in the audience.
Sorry,
Person.
sorry. Something like 10,000, it's somewhat less for elementary. Yeah.
All right. Representative McCray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. I'm curious, I know that all school units receive, ranging from 0 to, 80% funding from the state. And then districts have the option of adding to what that local state formula provides, by adding to it local in excess to the funding formula. And I'm sure it's probably a work session as to how much is added above and beyond the state funding formula by the local SAD 44 group, union.
We'll get that information for the work session.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Stockmeyer.
Thank you very much.
Folks, we've been about a half an hour in support. I'm going to switch now and start with folks in opposition, and then we'll switch